Question for you. Have you ever experienced a situation where fear gripped you to the point that you felt that you were held hostage? You couldn't do anything. You could just stand back and watch the situation unfold before you as if you were an outsider looking in through a glass window. Well, I had one of those experiences, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Growing up, my family included my mom, my dad, my brother, and my grandmother, Mamie. That's Mamie and me. I was about 14 years old there. I didn't know life without Mamie. She moved in with my parents before I was born, and she became my confidant and my staunchest supporter. I shared everything with her, my secret boy crushes and the hopes and dreams that I had for my future. Mamie and I, we also shared a bedroom together. But when I was about 16 years old, Mamie was diagnosed with the big C. Yep, it was colon cancer. And you know, in that bedroom that I just mentioned, we had 2 twin beds, and they were separated by a nightstand. And in that nightstand, Grandma kept a small transistor radio. Do some of you remember the transistor radios? She was a huge sports fan, and we'd often fall asleep at night listening to Bob Uecker and Merle Harmon calling the Milwaukee Brewer baseball games. One night in 1977, that's just how we fell asleep. But there was something different about that night. I woke up to the sound of Grandma moaning in pain. It wasn't that long, drawn-out moaning that you hear, but it was these short outbursts of air from her lungs, as though she didn't want anyone to know that she was in pain. But what we did know was that months earlier, the chemo and radiation had stopped working. That was the moment I was terrified. That was the moment I didn't know what to do. So I pretended that I was sleeping. I lay there eerily still. And to this day, I can remember feeling the weight of the blankets on my legs, and I willed myself not to move. I didn't want Grandma to know that I was awake and I was aware of what was going on. I don't know how long it was before I felt Grandma get out of bed, and she walked down the hallway towards my parents' bedroom. I'll tell you, it was a huge relief. It wasn't a relief for Mamie, but it was a relief for me. She walked down the hall, got my parents out of bed, and I remember hearing the whispered conversation in the hallway about taking her to the hospital. The decision must have been an easy one because there was no hesitation. Mamie and my mom sat in the living room and waited for my dad. And while they did that, I snuck out of bed and I stood at the doorway of my bedroom. I was torn. I wasn't sure what I should do. And I don't think it was the cancer that I was afraid of, but what I was afraid of was having to watch someone that I love in pain and not being able to do anything about it. So at this point, I figured I had 2 options. I could actually go into the living room and sit with Mom and Grandma, or I could slide right back into bed and pretend that I was sleeping and no one would know any differently. What do you think I did? Now remember, I was 16 years old, a few years older than I am in that photo. I was old enough to understand what was going on, and I was old enough to understand how much Mamie meant to me. Well, I'm embarrassed to stand here today and tell you that I did neither of those things. What I did was I hid under the kitchen table. Yep, at 16 years old, I hid under the kitchen table and waited until Mamie and my dad were in the car. Then I snuck back in bed with a heavy, heavy heart because I knew that Grandma wasn't coming home. And I was right, she died later that morning. Let me tell you, for 31 years, not 30 years, but I remember it exactly, it was 31 years, I walked around with the regret of never having said goodbye. I don't even remember saying, I love you. I must have, I just don't remember it. But what I do remember is that when it mattered most, I didn't say anything that night. Now, granted, as I said, it was 31 years, but I finally figured out how to use that moment of regret to change the trajectory of my life. If you think about your own life, when we're faced with fear, our natural instinct is retreat. And that's exactly what I did that night when I hid under the kitchen table. But if we look at it a little differently, and rather than retreat when we're faced with fear, if we lean into it a little bit, some amazing things can come out of it. Now, I knew that I could never make it up to Grandma. It was several years later, many years later. But I think what I was hoping was that by sharing my experiences through my story with someone else, I could help prevent them from experiencing that same regret. So that's where my hospice journey began. Do any of you know what a deathwalker is? Well, that's me, and I don't want you to freak out by the term. Let me first tell you what it means. I sit with dying people at the very end stages with only days or hours remaining. Death, it's a natural part of our life, and it's a certainty that all of us here will experience, but we're oftentimes unfamiliar with it and even afraid of it, just like I was when I hid under the kitchen table. So as a death walker, I have an opportunity to help dying people, their family, and friends in that journey. And I know many of you already know that witnessing a death can be a grief-stricken experience. But if we allow it, something amazing can actually come out of it. A gift, and I call that gift a sacred exchange. It wasn't long when I was working in hospice before I began to realize that there was a common theme to the messages my patients were giving me at the very end. Now, granted, I may be a little more sensitive to that message. For the last 30 years, I've been researching relationships, and in my early college days, I became obsessed with learning about the heartbeat of human connection. I learned very early on that it's part of who we are. We are born to create relationships. It's part of our DNA. We just can't help it. So when you think about it, if it's innate in us and we're born that way, that it's not a coincidence that at the very end stages, it's someone who's made a difference in our life and someone who has left a fingerprint on our soul that we're talking about. So that sacred exchange, that gift that I just mentioned, I like to think of it as a formula as to how we can live a happier and more fulfilling life, one that's free of relationship regrets. I like to call that gift that I received life's rule of 3. So let's just take a look at that. The first rule, leave fingerprints. The purpose that we are here on this earth is to touch another life and make connections. It sounds really simple, doesn't it? But it's not just about touching one other life, it's about doing it over and over again in small and in very large ways. That's what my patients have told me. And some of you know, or some of you have experienced this, it's not just the lifelong friendship that you had that gave you happiness and fulfillment in your life, but it's also those relationships that tugged at your heart a little bit, and you all have experienced some of that, or even the relationships that leave a little sadness. It's the friend that you had for 10 years that suddenly walked out of your life. And it's the ex-spouse who, even though they're an ex, gave you wonderful children and helped you grow in so many ways. My patients have told me time and time again, our purpose on this earth is to leave fingerprints. The second rule, fingerprints define who we are. From the moment we're born, we begin to take in outside stimuli. If you think about it, a healthy newborn baby is automatically programmed to enter into bonding relationships. That first love relationship that we form as an infant is with our primary caregiver. Yes, often it's a parent, but it could be a grandparent or even a nurse. That caregiver-child bond that each of you formed as an infant helped to shape your brain, influenced your self-esteem, and influenced how you take in and maintain healthy relationships, even today. And be sure of this, it didn't stop after your first birthday. Why didn't it stop? It didn't stop because we are automatically programmed to leave fingerprints and collect those fingerprints. I have a quick story to share with you. I've been going to the same Starbucks almost every day for the last year and a half. And I've been fortunate enough that no less than 7 or 8 Good Samaritans have paid for my coffee as I go through the car lane. I always make sure that I pay it forward. Well, actually, in this case, I pay it backward and I pay for the person behind me. But I've noticed something different about myself the last couple of months. Every once in a while, will drive up to the window to pay for my coffee, and I automatically pay it backward without waiting for the prompting from the person in front of me. So those 7 or 8 people, those Good Samaritans who paid for my coffee months before, not only left a fingerprint on my soul, but they actually helped define who I became months later. I'm sure they didn't realize it, and honestly, I never realized it. Fingerprints define us. And the third rule, the third gift that I was given, is to choose vulnerability. And it makes me laugh when I say that because that's a tough one. You're putting yourself out there, you're open. But because it is the most difficult, it also has the potential to leave the greatest impact. I can't tell you the number of times that I've had a patient say to me, I wish I would have said I love you more often. I wish I would have said I'm sorry. I wish I would have told my neighbor, my coworker, and my friend that I was glad they were in my life. One of my first patients was Edith. She was 87 years old, about 5 feet tall, and she still had a full head of curly white hair. Edith told me the story of her best friend, Elizabeth. They met when they were 4 years old, and they did everything together. But when they were 24, they had a silly fight over a handsome young sailor that lived down the block. Shortly after that fight, Elizabeth and her family moved, and Edith told me she didn't see Elizabeth, and they never talked after that. But she also told me for 63 years, she thought of Elizabeth on her birthday, November 30th. Edith also told me that she thought of Elizabeth the day she got married and had wished that she had been there to share that special day. She also thought of Elizabeth when each of her 3 children were born, and she thought of Elizabeth on the day her husband died, wishing that she had been there to receive a hug. Well, it's very interesting. This story, as you can tell by me recounting it to you, really touched my heart. I tried to find Elizabeth. Now, I knew that was a long shot, but at the very least, I wanted to try to find Elizabeth's family before Edith died. But this time, I was the one that ran out of time, and Edith died about 3 days later. So choose vulnerability. Life's rule of 3: leave fingerprints, fingerprints define us, and choose vulnerability. I know it sounds like all I've been talking about today is death, but that's really not the case. The gift that I want to give to you today is the same gift that I was given by my patients. It's the gift of being a life walker. Don't wait until it's too late. You don't have to be a death walker to receive the same gifts. As you're sitting there right now, is there someone that you can think of who's left a fingerprint on your soul? someone you've yet to thank, someone whose forgiveness you're seeking, someone whose presence in your life has made a difference. Be a life walker. Don't wait until it's too late. Thank you.